Hello, this is Dan Humberg with HarvestFires.com. I'm going to step through the tin pieces or the tin um, assembly for a Firestop kit that is designed to protect the exhaust system on a John Deere 9770 combine is what it was designed for. It'll also fit on a John Deere 9670, and it may also fit the late series 9760 and 9660 combines. The last part of the production of those they changed to this engine, and so this tin kit is designed to fit on all of those engines, or at least I believe it will fit on all of those engines. Um, this is a CAD model that I use to design the tin pieces to fit around there and kind of go together in a puzzle to make an enclosure around the hot parts of the engine exhaust system. This is it's a pretty complicated engine, and so it's a pretty complicated set of uh, tin pieces. I'll I want to just orient you to where we are on the engine and where the components are, and then I'm going to step through kind of the different parts on the machine or on the tin kit in the order probably that I would put them together. It's a This isn't necessarily the only aid you'll need. There is a installation video to show you how to physically put the parts on the machine. There's also another video to show you how to bend the individual pieces of tin so that they look like these in this demonstration. Um, but this might be another way of viewing that and looking at it. And it's probably a good starting place before you start bending tin and just understand how the pieces fit together. So if I look at it from this side, we're looking at the side of the engine. I don't have it oriented quite vertically here. I can try and do that. It's closer. There we go. That's pretty much horizontal. Your exhaust manifold on the side of the engine, the six exhaust ports dump into the exhaust manifold right along here, back in there. And then from that, there's a riser that comes up from the exhaust manifold into the turbocharger, and the turbocharger is actually located right back inside here above the exhaust manifold and the intake manifold, and actually above the head. The top of the engine head is right underneath this piece at this level. And if I'm looking at it from this side, I'm actually looking at it from as if I was the engine looking into this enclosure. If I can also look from the top down, get it oriented that way. And if I'm looking here from the top down, your turbocharger would be right in the exhaust turbine would be right inside here. The compressor turbine that compresses the fresh air is right here, and it takes air in from this side and it pushes it out down through a rubber hose or fitting that comes out right down here. After the exhaust turbine is done with the exhaust, it goes out through an exhaust pipe this direction. If we look at this end, that's where that exhaust pipe is going to exit this box, and it's going to go directly into your muffler right after it exits the box here. On this side, that's upside down. Let's orient it this way. On the back side, or this would be the tail end of the back of the, looking at it from the back side of the engine. This is the opening where we're going to push fresh filtered air into this enclosure to keep it clean in there so that there's no volatile dust that can get in near the exhaust manifold or the turbocharger exhaust turbine. Those are the components that I believe would be hot enough to ignite that dust on contact. The rest of this is all really just to fit around the bits and pieces that represent this engine. You'll see lots of these areas like this with finger cuts, so that means that something is going to come through here that I can't be absolutely certain of whether it's going to come through here where my cursor is or over here, or if it's going to need to be extend up a little bit. So these give you flexibility in how you bend these in order to fit around those components. In this case, we have, I think it's an oil line that comes through here, and there's an electrical wiring harness that comes through here as well. Over here, we see these cuts in this piece. That same oil line that serves the turbocharger bearing goes back in through here. They managed to snake that oil line all over the machine in this case, and we end up encountering it about 3 times with the pieces of this enclosure. This complicated origami piece here that's, sorry, let's get this over. This complicated piece that folds up into this kind of box-like structure is to try to seal up the air where there's a turbocharger wastegate actuator. It controls the geometry of your turbocharger, and it is mostly on the outside of the box here, but we have to kind of has a really odd shape, and we have to try to seal it up so that we don't lose a lot of the air that we're pumping in here at that one component. The bearing for the turbocharger between the compressor and the exhaust turbine is right in this area. This big circular cut here it actually fits up against the compressor turbine to try and seal this whole area up so that we can't lose too much air through that area. So anyway, we've got exhaust manifold down here, exhaust turbine up here, and then there's a whole bunch of other stuff that we have to just work around. This engine uses exhaust gas recirculation, where they take some of your exhaust and they bring it back and cool it with engine coolant and then run it back through the engine again, and it lowers the amount of nitrogen oxides that are produced in the combustion process. It helps them meet the EPA specs for this generation of engine. But that means that outside of the exhaust manifold, we got this cooling jacket, and there's no way to enclose the exhaust manifold without also enclosing the cooling jacket, and that means handling the fluid that goes into that cooling jacket, or the pipes that go in there and come out of there, and we've got an oil line that serves the turbo bearing and all these components to fit around. So it's just a complicated bunch of pieces to fit around all that stuff. So that's the kind of the layout of the basic set of tin on this around the engine. Now let's look at individual pieces in the order in which I would actually put them on if I was going to assemble this onto an engine. First of all, you have to take some pieces of sheet metal and stuff off between the grain tank and the engine in order just to be able to get at all of this. But once you've done that, and that's all shown in the video on how to do the install on the combine. So let's talk about individual pieces and the order in which we do things here. My first piece to work with is this light blue piece here. It just fits on top of the head. There are slots to accommodate different bolts back here. There's actually two or three, I think three here that we end up pulling. They have I think all three of those have it's a little L-shaped bracket or Z-shaped bracket that they hold down onto the head, and each one of those has a kind of a clamp-like thing that holds part of the wiring harness, because the wiring harness runs around the top of the head here, and they keep it restrained with those. Well, we pull those bolts. They're 8mm bolts, 13mm socket. We pull those temporarily, slide this piece in place, and then put those bolts back in, and they actually hold this down onto the head and hold that first chunk in place. This cutout right here, whenever I point at one of these pieces, the boundary of that piece with all of its folds and everything is highlighted in gold. So you'll see that when I point at one, that's the boundaries of that piece. But this cutout right here fits around, it's a valve, and it's the valve that is your exhaust gas recirculation valve. It determines how much of that exhaust gas is allowed to enter the incoming fresh air and go back through the engine a second time. And so that it slips around that and comes in here and fits into place. And once that slips, it's a little tricky to get it in there, but once it comes in, it gets into place, these holes should line up, these slots should line up, and you can put a bolt or two back in there and hold it down. That one's very doable. It's not real hard. The second piece that I would work with is probably this large front piece. It's fairly complicated. For a large piece, complicated, has a lot of bends. It has this zigzag bend here where we bend in and up and over, and has a tab, I think, on this side as well. It's got tabs over here and tabs down here that bend in at an angle. Anyway, it's just a complicated piece, but it's not terribly hard to put on. There is another one of these brackets that holds part of the wiring harness that's bolted on right here. Again, an 8mm bolt, 13mm socket. You're going to pull that one, loosen it or take it off temporarily, and we slip this piece in place here to where it lines up over that slot lines up over that bolt hole, and then put the bracket and bolt back on, And that's one of the things that helps align this and put it in place and then holds it on when you tighten that bolt down. I wouldn't tighten the bolt just yet, but you can bring it up close anyway. When you put that piece in place, it's going to have a tab that slips underneath the top piece here. Once we have that in place, this pilot hole will line up, and you can actually put a screw through there and it will lock those two together in the right position. Probably at that point you might be able to snug this bolt back up. There's also pilot holes right here that will tie this piece to the flange on the top blue piece, and again lock those two together and line them all up. So the big gray piece is the second piece, and that's pretty much all you need to do for now, is to attach it to the first piece that was put in place. The third piece that I'd work with is this dark blue one on the end, and this is kind of it's an important piece. It's also obviously a quite a bunch of folds in it, bunch of tabs and everything. There's a tab here that will fit around the front piece that we just put on. It's got this kind of channel bend in it here. That's because we have a sensor that's right here and we have to get behind it and keep that on the outside, and so it'll slip in behind that sensor. Has a top tab on the top so that it'll attach to the top piece here through that hole. And it has tabs over here and here on the around this side of it. And those are not to attach to anything. They're just to be able to seal it up against the castings that surround this area. And those tabs, they show them at 90 degrees on the bends here, I think. But you actually want to adjust those, or maybe not make them quite 90-degree bends, so that they fit tight up against the surface that they're intended to, and kind of seal that surface against that part of the engine. That's the intention anyway. You may have to adjust them, but it may not be a full 90-degree bend on those tabs, just so that they press up against the wall that they're trying to seal up against. This hole in the end with the pedals cut fits around a coolant line that leaves that exhaust gas cooling jacket. And so that's a line that's about 3/4 of an inch in diameter that comes out through here. It's a steel line, but it's certainly not hardened steel. It's just a soft steel line. And we need to fit as closely as we can around that to seal this end up without damaging that in any way. And so I've cut these flower petals here. You can bend them out towards us here, towards the radiator fan. You would bend them out a little bit, and then you can bring them back in because although I've tried to measure that line to know that this is where it's going to come through here, I think probably every different 9770 I've been on had that line shifted a little bit, maybe a 1/4 inch this way, or 1/4 inch this way, or 1/4 inch down, or 1/4 inch up, or maybe more than that. Anyway, by cutting these petals, it allows us to adapt to the actual position of that tube as it comes through here. Now you may want to bend these petals out just a little bit with the tip of a pliers so that they fit parallel to that tube and don't point right at it, because we don't want to abrade that and cut through it. It would lose coolant and you'd overheat your engine, and that would be bad. But you want it to fit as closely as you can around that tube as it comes through there. The other thing that I'll suggest is when you get done, you may want to tape over this area with some of the aluminum foil tape, aluminum foil type duct tape that we provide with the kit, to further seal up this area, because the radiator fan is blowing at this end of the enclosure with all of its might, and I do not want that blowing dust inside this enclosure. We're pushing air into the enclosure and hopefully it's pushing out of here, but the radiator fan is blowing really hard at this spot, and I don't want dust getting in there. So you may want to seal it up as best you can on this end. That's pretty much goes for everything on this end, as we want to try and seal it up tight. We'll let air out of our box, but we'll let it out at the other end rather than this end. One other thing I'm going to point out about this piece, doesn't show here, but there will be a perforated dotted line in your piece of tin. Go from one of these pedals here, or somewhere here, across to this end. And the purpose of that is that you can bend on that line just to get this piece in place. This thing is a real bear cat to snake into place. And so because you have to get it around this tube, and the tube sticks out here and then makes a corner, and so just getting it wrapped around the tube and then to fit into place is a challenge. So now you can bend on that dotted line, this piece temporarily, slip it around the pipe, get it up into place, and then bend this panel back up where it belongs to fit tight up against the surfaces around here. So spend some time getting this. It's not easy to get in and look at this. You're essentially trying to squish yourself between the engine and the radiator fan, but it's an important piece to fit in place. Once it's in place, you can put screws through this front side panel into the piece that we've already got established on here, and one through the, excuse me, through the top up here to connect it to piece number 1. And so that'll it'll be in the right position then, and hopefully we've got this fit around that tube, and everything else here is fitting up against the engine parts so that it can't really get dust in around it. If it's not, if it looks loose, if you got gaps, then look at trying to refit it so that it fits tight against the engine in all places where you can there. So that's the third piece. Fourth piece I might do, I don't know if it's numbered 4 or not, but be this bottom, the first part of this bottom piece. It has a tab on this end to overlap the piece we just talked about. It has a tab, a small tab here that will overlap the large outside panel here. And so those screws, you can screw it together with screws there. It also has on the bottom a couple of openings. This one in the front part has to do with that water jacket arrangement, that cooling jacket for the exhaust gas recirculation. It should fit around that. I've measured it a number of times. It should fit, slip in from the end and slip around that rectangular type piece. The hole in the back here with the pedals, this is your return line from the turbocharger bearing. So this may be a rubber line or maybe a steel line, but at this point it may be rubber. Anyway, it comes through here, and I've cut pedals in here so that you can bend these little tabs to run parallel to that line if necessary, so that you don't risk abrading that or cutting that line so that you'd lose engine oil out of that line. So we'd like to give it a little bit of clearance there, and we'd like these pedals to be bent so that they're parallel to that, to the tube itself, the oil line as it drops down. It goes back down and into the crankcase. I would also encourage you to potentially tape around here with some of that foil tape to tighten this hole up if possible, so we don't lose too much engine air around this area. So those are the two cuts in that piece. It will slide in from the left here and slip in around those tubes. Also, I'll point out that this front edge of this is just a sharp, let me get it oriented so you can see it. This edge right along here where my cursor is running is just the edge of the tin, and it will slip into kind of a gap between, I think it's actually a gap between the engine head and the top of the block. There's a little space there on the engine, and this will kind of slip in there and rest in there. You may have to clean that space out with a piece of tin or a screwdriver or something that you can slip in there, because it will fill with dust a lot of times. And then there's kind of an arch cut out in here because there's kind of a lump in there, and sometimes it doesn't want to fit all the way along here in that thing. But it should, the way it's cut now, it should fit into that slot. If necessary, you can trim more with a tin snips along here, but you shouldn't really have to. This should fit into place in there now. Okay, so that's the fourth piece, I believe. Let's see, what do we want to do as piece number 5? Well, although I don't know that it's important that this be piece number 5, we could do this other bottom panel here, this dark blue piece, as piece number 5. It wouldn't hurt anyway. It slips in from the right-hand end over here, snakes into place. Again, this inside edge down here slips into that slot between kind of the head and the block. Again, you may need to clean that slot out, and it has to fit around a tube, some kind of a tube. I don't know, I forget if it's the oil line or what it is, or a coolant line that goes up through here. But there's a cutout for it in here, so it should slip into place and then slip around that tube. Once you have that in place, you can reach underneath, and there are 2 pilot holes for the screws to link the first one and this light blue and dark blue pieces together. Notice though that the dark blue one is to slip on top of, above the light blue one here, so that the earlier put in place one is actually on the bottom. That's done so that the air blast from the radiator that's running across here slips over this onto this one and doesn't blow under the second one and then try to get in the inside of this. I just like everything to shed dust moving from left to right so that it can't get dust into the enclosure. So that's that piece. We'll be able to screw it on to other things later on, but you could put that piece in place if you're at that point in the installation. Probably another piece that you could do next, this little bracket here. It's got front panel and then tabs on this side and a tab on the top. It fits around a sensor. There's either a temperature sensor or pressure sensor that goes into that cooling jacket here and pokes out of here, and we need to be able to slip around that. So we slip, this big piece comes up from underneath, and then this piece can slip down from on top to kind of surround that piece. And then there's a couple of places for screw holes, actually a bunch. We got 6 screw holes. That thing will hold the whole assembly together, it looks like. So that one should fit into place here. If necessary, you could trim around this to fit around that sensor. Again, you want a little clearance there. It's a plastic snap-on fitting on the sensor, but this should give it clearance around there. You need a little bit of clearance. You don't want any big gaps. Over here, where we have this kind of confluence of a lot of angles, that's all done because the compressor turbine has a rubber hose that's connected to it that's dumping the compressed air out down into the front here. I can angle this from the side, and you might that compressor turbine has a big tube that pushes the air down, or the air leaving that compressor turbine comes down and out here, kind of cuts through the what would be the corner of our enclosure here otherwise. So I had to try and make this seal up a little bit around here underneath that tube, and it's a complicated area. So there are 2 tabs here and over here that are in this gray piece, and then we have this light blue chunk here that has a tab down here and then 2 tabs up here and up here, and then this angled piece here. It's kind of a complicated piece, but you can bend it, screw it on here, and then it'll have these ears that kind of lay on top of these other tabs and help seal up this area. Again, it doesn't have to seal tight, but we don't want to lose a lot of air around that because we want the air to flow to all parts inside this enclosure rather than dump all out at one location. So we put that piece in place. Once we have that one done, let's see, what should we do next? I think I would probably come around. Let's see if I can get this oriented so we can see it here. That's better. This piece that we've highlighted here now, that will fit down onto the head of the engine. It has 2 screw slots or bolt slots and a partial slot down here, and those are going to fit to where we've got some small bolts in the head, and you can pull those bolts. Actually, there aren't bolts in there right now. I think there are open threaded holes, and so you can, I think, thread. We'll provide bolts with the kit that will thread into those holes in the head and hold this piece down at that location. So that piece has a tab that runs along here that you can bend those tabs so that they're bent and they're slotted here because you have to fit underneath the oil line that is heading to that turbocharger. And so you have to kind of snake these tabs underneath that oil line that runs right along the head, and then pivot it so that the tabs fit on the head, and then you can bolt that down. Probably before you bolt it down, you're going to want to check to make sure everything fits here for a while, but that will slip into place. Again, as I said earlier, this is going to fit around both probably that oil line and a wiring harness bundle that comes out of that, passes through here at kind of an angle. And hopefully you can open these up as necessary to provide clearance around those components, but not very much clearance. You can also use that tape to tighten it up a little bit once we get it in place. So that piece will slip in there, set on top of the head, and bolt down eventually. After you've got that one, then we have the origami piece, the folding puzzle here. That's this gray chunk here, and it's got 6 screw holes that will screw it onto this vertical piece here now. You probably don't need 6 screws, but there's 6 there that will line up. But before you put it on, there's a lot of folding to do. It'll fold into a kind of a box shape here with a come out and then over, and then a tab that comes over and down from the top, and this piece will fold down and then this way, and this tab over here will fold around and kind of box that all in. That's also explained in the video that shows how to fold the individual tin pieces. But this is what it will look like. And if there's any doubt on that folding video, come back and look at this one, because this is how it has to lay when it's assembled. And so if it doesn't look like that when you get done bending it, this is the correct shape for it, whether I did it right in that folding video or not. Once you have that one folded, you can screw it onto the vertical here, and it should fit. And this complex shape here should stick inside a part of that actuator box and kind of seal it up around this edge here a little bit. Let's see, after we have that one, we could probably do this gold colored or orange colored one. That piece, once it's folded, and again, you can look at the shape of it here to know how to fold it. It's got a tab on the bottom that bends out here. These other tabs bend back the other direction. And then on this side, there's a tab that bends around, and then another little one that angles out there. This piece you're going to have to snake in. The turbocharger compressor is right here, and this goes behind it. And then there's a big rubber hump connector for the exhaust out of that compressor, or I take it back, it's the intake air coming into that compressor. And you've got to snake this thing underneath there, and it's a bit of a tight fit. You actually may have to bend some of the tabs a little bit here just to get it fit in place, and then bend them back to where they belong as you get it in underneath there. But once you get it in behind that compressor, it will fit up against the inside of the compressor to kind of seal up against that. It's kind of a donut shape for that compressor, and this fits against one side of the donut. And then there are screw holes in this tab. This will fit down flat on the first piece that we installed here. And I put 5 screw holes in here. You do not need 5 screws to hold it in place. I just put 5 screw holes because I couldn't with certainty know exactly where this was going to attach to the piece below. So there are no, if we zoom in here, you'll notice there's a pilot hole through the gold piece, but not through the blue piece. That means you're going to have to shoot a screw through where you want it to be. The screws are self-drilling, self-tapping screws, but you've got a pilot hole for the first piece. Once you have it in there and pressed up against the inside of the compressor turbine and overlapping, see where it overlaps the gray piece that we just got done putting in place? When we're overlapping up against that, you can shoot a screw through here and a screw through here, maybe 2 of them and maybe one out in front here. And then this piece now can be bent so that it fits up against the tabs on this earlier assembly in here, and seals up this area where the compressed air leaves the compressor turbine. Anyway, that's one we don't have pilot holes for excuse me, for the screws completely drilled. You'll have to shoot those through, and 1 or 2 back here and 1 in the front will hold that piece in place. Once you have that orangish piece in place, we could probably do, let me get this flipped around and oriented so we're in where we want to be again. After that one, let's see, what should we do next? I believe we could probably do this piece, the piece that goes over the top of the turbocharger bearing next. I'm highlighting the edges of it and pointing at it. It's dark gray. Again, you can see what it's shaped like here, but you can also see that in the video on folding the tin. That piece will slip down on top of the turbocharger bearing here, and there'll be 2 screw holes here. And we can probably put those 2 screws in from this end to hold it on temporarily. Those 2, and then that same piece will slide down around This is where that turbocharger pressure line for the turbocharger bearing enters the picture again and again and again. It comes through here underneath and it has to come up through here, and then it reverses and goes back through this piece. But when you slide this gray piece down, it should fit around that turbocharger oil line. It's a hard steel line about 3/8 inch diameter that will go through here into the turbocharger bearing. Again, I've put little cuts here so that you can open this up or close it as necessary to fit close around that line. You do not want to be solidly up against that line with any of these edges, because they might be hard enough or sharp enough that if they vibrate against that, they could cut that line, and we don't want to do that. So that line will come through here, but make sure there's a little bit of clearance around that line. When we're done with this, you want clearance there. And you can close it up with tape if you need to, but we want clearance around that oil line. Once that piece is in place, you can, let's see, where do we get it? Well, I guess it doesn't screw in place other than the 2 screws in the back until we put some more stuff on here. Then we can, after that one's in place, we can put this large panel, this big side panel, if you want to call it, in place. That one now overlays the earlier piece that we had. It will go overlay the tab from the dark blue piece on the bottom, and it'll go up vertically here all the way to the top. Sorry, get it back in the field of view here. It'll go all the way to the top of the assembly here, and it'll screw these 4 screws here, and these 2 here will locate it for sure in place. And then you can put screws through down here at the bottom as well to kind of anchor that piece in place. Once that one is in place, we can put this little blue piece in. That piece comes into play here with all these fingers, again because of that hard oil line that serves the turbocharger bearing that runs everywhere around this machine. So we can slip that piece in place, but you can flex these fingers or bend them as necessary to accommodate that oil line. That line's going to come from underneath the turbocharger compressor, and it's going to angle up and over here and then make a reverse turn and go through this hole like we said before. But you may need to bend these tabs to clear that line as it comes up through here. Again, you want clearance. You don't want it rubbing on that line, but these are there so that you can adjust to minimize the amount of air that's lost around that line as it comes through here. And that's exactly what you want to do, is bend these tabs however necessary to clear that oil line, but to seal up this area so we don't lose a lot of air. It looks like you're going to lose a ton of air, but you got a turbocharger compressor here that's actually going to be in the way or seal up a lot of this area. But there is a gap here where that line comes through, and so you're going to have to bend these tabs as necessary to accommodate that. Once it's in place, you got a screw here, screw here, and screw here that will tie it to the other pieces and hold that one in place. After that, I'd probably look to see is there any place that needs any of that tape in order to seal this area up, but that'll fit in place there. Once you have that one done, we're kind of getting on the home stretch. This piece, this gray piece underneath from this end, will slide in from the right hand end. It will slide in by there. You can see it when I highlight it. You can see the tabs highlighted gold. It'll slide on top of this blue piece. Again, slide in above that and behind the gray piece. And it has a tab back here that will help close up the hole around this coolant or oil line, whatever it is that runs through that bottom space here. So it'll slip in there as well. I've got it shown on top of this blue line. That would be best because it'll shed dust from the radiator blast coming across here that way. So slip it in on top of the blue piece, behind the dark gray piece here, and then when you get it in position, if you can get even 1 screw in through here, it'll help line up the rest of the screw holes. And when you get 2 of them, then the rest of them line up, and you should be able to just put screw after screw after screw through here, and every time you put another one in, the next ones will line up. So that piece goes in place. It has tabs up here for the next one. this piece, this blue piece, dark one here, fits around to help seal up around the exhaust pipe as it leaves this box. Now this piece is, when it's flat, it looks symmetrical, meaning it looks the same left and right. And it does. It has tabs on this side, has a tab on the bottom. Doesn't have a tab on the bottom, has tabs on the left and right sides. But it looks pretty much the same left and right. What I want to point out here is that there is, on this side, there's a little cut in here, and that cut is just made as a reference. The laser will cut that little notch in there, helps you know where you are here. And this is as true when you're folding the tin as well as putting it on here. If you've got this piece and you've got that little cut and it's on the other side, you've got this folded backwards or something. So this is a good one to look here when you're actually doing the folds on it, the bends. So you're going to take the piece, bend this one underneath, bend this tab up, bend this tab over, and you're going to have that little notch here now on the top of this this tab. If we go to the other side, there is no tab on that one. No, excuse me, no little notch in the tab on that side. Notice that there's a tab that sticks up behind here as well. That's just so we tie these two together, the top and the bottom one. But otherwise, this piece looks the same, and you can get it folded wrong. It's not the same left and right, but it looks close enough that you can get it wrong. The pipe doesn't come through right at the end of the center. It's a little bit to the right of center. And so if you get it folded wrong, it won't fit when we want to put it in place. But it slips in over this, slips in place, and you can screw it on both from the bottom, from this side, and from this side to this big piece over here. And we got a couple more. This gray piece here, again with the matching notch right there. Matching notch right there. If it's folded correctly, will fit there. And you can screw it on there. You may or may not be able to reach these screw holes, the muffler's right here. And so it may preclude you from putting screws through those holes, and that's not a big deal. But you can get it on both here, front side and back side. And when you get that one in place, sorry, I hit the wrong button. The only thing left at that point is this big panel that goes on the top. And when you get to that point, it's time to celebrate with a beverage of your choice, whether that's a Coca-Cola or whether it's a beer, or I don't care what. But this is the last piece of the tin enclosure to go on. And so you can fit that in this. If you get to this point, it's a piece of cake. Put that piece on, just shoot the screws through it or down into the pieces all around, and it will tie everything else together now. So if we've gone through the entire assembly and didn't run into any major roadblocks, you'll find that you now have a box around much of the engine's exhaust system, the exhaust turbocharger turbine, the exhaust pipe that runs over to the muffler, the exhaust manifold, and the neck that joins the manifold up to the exhaust turbine. We've also enclosed a bunch of other stuff, the coolant jacket, the intake manifold, they're all inside there as well. But thankfully, we don't have to service them very often. I did get asked a question about service at one point. He asked about possibly servicing the wastegate actuator that serves the turbocharger. If you ever end up doing that, you can pull this piece off with the 6 bolts here, that complicated piece. You might have to pull this piece off here, this highlighted piece, maybe even that gold piece, and then you should have access to replace, if necessary, that wastegate actuator on the turbocharger. You'll have asked. There's a moving arm that runs from that actuator up through here into to swing a piece on the turbocharger exhaust turbine itself. And so if you're going to put a new one on there, you need to be able to take this off to access that. You also could take the top panel off pretty easily, and you might be able to access it through there. So it is possible to do that. The one thing I point out is that after putting the tin on, we usually go around and put some of that aluminum foil tape over many of these screws. And I do that not so much because anything is going to leak there, it's just because
these are sheet metal screws, and with the vibration on the engine, they could vibrate loose. And that tape helps seal up joints, but it also helps keep those screws from vibrating loose. So if you do end up taking something off here, you're going to have to pull that sealing tape or that tape. So if you're concerned about servicing this, you may want to minimize the amount of tape that you put on these areas. The rest of it, I don't know that it matters a lot. Again, this end, probably this blue piece here is probably one of the more critical pieces. Spend a little time, sorry, get back here. Spend a little time trying to make sure that you've got this end of the system sealed up as well as possible. If you end up putting tape over some of these joints to seal it up, that's fine. Most of it, the amount of air that leaks in or out around these would be very small, but I do not want dust being able to be blown inside the enclosure because it will eventually then find its way to a place that's hot enough to ignite it. May still not cause much of a problem inside there, but I just don't want any chance that you create sparks with this system or from the exhaust system. So that's the tin assembly and the parts for the tin kit on a Firestop kit for a John Deere. This was really designed for the 9770, but the 9760, no, said that wrong, 9670, same engine, just probably tuned down a little bit in terms of the horsepower rating. Looks identical, and I have done at least one install on a 9670 that it fit on. I also believe that the late series 9660 and 9760 may have this engine, and I hope that it will fit the same way on there. If you have one of those and you find that there's some differences, you may have to adapt the kit, but from everything I've seen, it looks like it should be the same engine, and so this tin kit should fit on that as well. If there's going to be changes, it's probably going to be things like in the oil line, the location of that, or the electrical wiring harness and things like that. But the pictures I have seen look to me like it is the same engine. So I hope that you'll find that it fits the same way. As I tell everybody at the end of these videos, this kit will greatly reduce the occurrence of fires in a volatile crop like sunflowers, and so it should alleviate much of the headaches that you have with fires on the machine, but I cannot guarantee that you'll never have a fire on the combine again. The fire could be started by your alternator if it throws a spark, another part of the wiring harness that throws a spark, a hot bearing that throws a spark. I have seen some things happen on John Deere combines that make me think that there are some places on the combine that can produce a fire from a static discharge. I don't believe that that's the major cause of fires on these machines, but I have seen some evidence up um, near the feeder house and the forward part of the rotor where people seem to get frequent fires there that do not come from the exhaust system. And they're not coming from a hot bearing there. I think that may be a case where we may be able to ignite a dust cloud with a static spark. It doesn't ignite from a single spark going to a surface, but it could ignite possibly as in a place where it's so dusty that you get an explosive mixture. Now it won't explode, but it may make a little puff of flame that then leaves a residual smolder going on a dusty surface. So if you find that happening in that location, that may be what the cause is of it. Otherwise, I think you'll find that this reduces the occurrence of chronic smolders on your machine dramatically, but I can't guarantee you'll never have a fire. Please be careful and vigilant during your harvest. Hope you have a safe harvest. Thanks very much.